Happy Epiphany! Happy Epiphany, brothers and sisters in Christ, both near and far. We've had quite a journey through Advent, to Christmas Day, to Christ's birth, through 12 days of Christmas, which lead us here to the season, to the day of Epiphany, where in our gospel passage we read about the Magi's visit to God incarnate in Christ Jesus, present in a physical, tangible way to these wise men, these Magi. And as we've talked a lot in our community about Christ's coming and God's presence with us, that it's not just on one day, but that Christ's coming happens each and every day. God is present with us each and every day. And God is present to all of us, right? And God is present to Magi, as we would call, scripturally, we would call them Gentiles. And it's not just about one specific population. That God comes to be present with each and every one of us. And as I wrote in our Advent devotional for the day of Epiphany, and hopefully you've enjoyed them as much as we enjoyed producing them and offering them as a gift to you, I used Ephesians, where Paul writes about distributing God's grace. And for me, this was a powerful image of God's grace being something that I also have agency in, that I am responsible for being a distributor of God's grace. That as God comes to be present with us, among us, showing us what it looks like, what grace looks like, what love looks like, what it looks like to care for strangers. As I read Paul's text, it hit me in a powerful way that I am too responsible. That in Christ coming each and every day, I get to be present to people in a way that expresses God's grace. It's in a stranger coming to check in on us. It's in neighbors who say, "Hey, you don't look well today. How can I care for you?" It's in saying that it doesn't matter about things like cultural histories or sexual orientation or ethnicities, or for those who may not even know what God's grace is or who God is, that my responsibility is to distribute that grace freely in such a way that it flows from every moment that I live and breathe. It flows from every part of my very being. That it's no longer about who I am, or it's no longer about me doing things for myself, but it's about me saying, I'm going to distribute a grace that has been offered so freely to me, and I have seen time and time again throughout the scriptures of what it looks like to sit and have a meal, what it looks like to get to know someone's story. And I know for those of you who've been following our videos and who've been a part of our community for a while, these are not new concepts that you've heard from any of us. I think it's so important to our very, very core and each and every moment of our lives, of our very being, that as we think about God's presence among the Gentiles, that as we think about God's presence with Jews, that As we think about God's presence to each and every human being, because God created each and every human being. And as God comes to be present among us, I have work to do in the midst of that. I have agency. I have something that in seeing that and in experiencing that and being part and privileged to that I now have something that I can redistribute to one another, to you. How are we caring for one another, particularly in this new year? How are we caring for one another? How are we being agents of God's grace and sharing it so freely and so abundantly in such a way that expresses God's great love for us, that God came to be with us in a vulnerable human child? So as we think about Epiphany, as we think about this new year, as we think about the ways that God continues to be present among us, let us think how we can be present to one another.